Call to order. Welcome to the Laramie City Council work session, Monday, November 24th, 2025. And we'll start this work session with public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Great. Seeing none, we will begin our work session tonight, Municipal Matter Roundtable, with the City of Laramie City Council and Albany County State Legislative Representatives. And before we start, maybe each person could just say their name and introduce themselves, and we'll go around and then we'll begin.
I'm Nancy Bartholomew, City Clerk.
Thank you.
Brandon Newman, City Council Ward 2.
Coach Manager, House District 46.
Melanie Vito, City Council Ward 2.
And Chester, House District 13.
Ronald Benza, House District 45.
Sharon Covey, Laramie Mayor.
Micah Richardson.
Barry Crump, Senate District 10.
Aaron O'Doherty, City Council Ward 3.
Jim Freed, City Council, Ward 2.
Trey Sherwood, House District 14.
Thank you very much. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Assistant City Manager, Todd Fieser. Welcome, Mr. Fieser.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, and honorable state legislators, we are so appreciative of you coming out tonight. It means a lot that you'll spend this evening with us. Tonight is probably a little different than you've seen in the past as we worked on this. We felt like we really wanted to work hard to open the line of communication and make sure that we were all discussing issues that are important to us as we move forward. I would be remiss to say that I want to thank Janine Jordan, our outgoing city manager, for all the support. We're certainly excited to be here tonight, and we hope you find this productive and valuable to you as we move into this next legislative session. We did plan on an icebreaker tonight. How many people got their stuff turned in? Is anybody still hanging on it? Right. Yeah, over to Brandon. So we were hoping to gain your top 3 policy issues as you head into the legislature, the top 3 policy issues for city staff and our councilors as we move into this. I have a hunch that what we've decided to present to you tonight is probably going to jive with what you probably believe are some of your top 3 policy issues. So we're going to give Brandon just a few minutes to pull that information together, make it succinct, and give you just a few more minutes to finish your meal tonight before we get going into the icebreaker. Does anybody have any questions before we guys move through tonight? Councilor Dory.
I was wondering if Director Bjork wanted to lead us in some laugh yoga.
Before you want to give us a couple 5 minutes of laughter yoga, why?
Sure, yeah.
All right, thank you.
So for some context of why it's been requested, I'm a certified laughter yoga leader. Yeah, I won't trip on the cord. Thank you, Nancy. So I travel all around teaching positive psychology and using laughter, non-humor based laughter. So I'm not going to explain any more than that. I'm just going to ask you to follow along with me by taking a deep breath in and just blow that air out. Now, this next one, we're going to do something a little more exciting, the laughter part of it. When we laugh with our diaphragm. We want it to be a belly laugh. It's the difference between ha-ha and ha-ha. So just keep that in mind. We're going to take another deep breath in. This time we're going to laugh the air out. This is a really great way to release endorphins, lower cortisol, oxygenate our body, and generally feel great after just a couple of those. So we're just going to do a couple of those deep breathing laugh outs, and I'll turn it back over. So because this is being broadcast in public, right? Yeah, great. Thank you, Councilor O'Doherty. Yeah, appreciate that. So we're just going to, again, just take a nice deep breath in. This might feel weird for those of you that haven't done it, but laugh out. Not a competition, but if it was, I would have won. We're gonna do that one more time. We're gonna take another deep breath in. We're gonna hold it, and laugh out. One more time, just to really lock it in. Deep breath in. Hold it, and thank you, Mr. Feeser. I'll turn it back over to you.
Welcome to Laramie.
I've actually been through that a few times, and forgive my discrepancy when I called it Michael Director Board. We appreciate that. Appreciate it. It's interesting to see you, and even those of you that may not participate fully, you're smiling too, right? So about releasing the endorphins and feeling better about what we have. Brandon, how are we coming together there?
You're almost there.
Okay, we'll give you a couple more minutes.
Chris, there's soup, hello, there's soup and salad if you want anything to eat.
Thank you.
Water and tea as well.
The transcript will go off.
More laughter there.
That's right. That's pretty good.
Well, now no one will take us seriously.
Work on different items. I should probably keep this closer to me, correct? So it was about creating synergy and showing that all entities are working towards similar things as you look at the environment that we're all in and what we all feel is important to our community here locally. A lot of what you see is on there. You'll see property taxes and tax for the city of Laramie. Town and Gap, it's obvious, our largest employer, our largest landholder, our largest entity in Laramie is University of Wyoming, and Town and Gown is about relationships, not only with the university, but with biotech and LLC. And education is a large part of this community. It's important to us as city staff. When you think about staffing analysis or protection of public lands, property taxes, gaming, local advocacy, and then you look at the Albany County Legislature, there's local taxes and fees, surface water, there was 2 for that. SNAP funding, healthcare costs and access, electric supply resilience and access. But when you look at the ones that were tied together in 15 of us all figured that housing was one of the most important top of mind issues as we come into the next legislature. And there are bills that are coming through the legislature that will be important that lead to either positive housing outcomes or they may actually deter some of the housing outcomes. What we want to give you tonight is a little bit of information on how the city of Laramie is actually handling that. The next piece is local control. We'll talk about that a little bit later also. And surprisingly, sustainable municipal funding, local option taxes, 9 people have all selected that. So it's important to know that we all have some synergy on what's happening. Interestingly enough, tonight's agenda actually includes municipal funding that's going to be given by Director Wade, our Administrative Services Director, Chief Financial Officer is going to give that presentation tonight. The next portion is going to be housing, which is going to be guided by Derek Taney, our Community Economic Development Director. And then finally, we're going to talk about 3 issues that I've actually found very important to me, which is the local control issue, the authority to cooperate, and then about communication between all of us as we move through this next legislative session. So it's important for me to know that as staff and I were working on this presentation, that we actually had the foresight to see what may come out as top of mind issues. And I think this presentation will ring true to that. As we get done with the presentation, our intent is to turn it over to you all as the board sitting together to discuss the issues and talk about what's coming, how we can address them, how it works as we move forward. If anybody have any questions before I turn it over to Director Wood? Look at that, I'm doing such a good job answering questions, it's awesome. Director Wood. Thank you, Brent.
I'm gonna follow Todd's lead and stand to the side because I think that's really cool. And I actually think it's better for everyone. It is so exciting to see a full house here this evening. And we're looking forward to just giving you a couple of slides that you may find interesting from a finance perspective. Thank you. Maybe, here we go. One of the things that we are really excited about is the potential for more stability for local government distributions, or we might call it the direct distribution, or we all know what I mean. That source of funding that comes from over-the-cap collections of mineral royalties and severance taxes. The city of Laramie, along with other Wyoming municipalities, supports the diversion of a portion of state sales and use tax collections as a stable funding source for local government distributions. And so this means that the local government distributions are no longer funded with those over-the-cap collections, and they would be permanently funded with a portion, a fixed portion of the state's sales and use taxes. So that does indeed mean that we share up and we share down. There's no caveat there in that regard. If you watch the last Joint Appropriations Committee, you'll know that that committee requested a bill draft to divert 5.6%, which amounts to a $105 million distribution, which also matches the governor's current recommendation for direct distribution. WAM and WCCA proposed initially 8%, or $146 million, just for the reason of the inflation that we're all familiar with. And if we're going to get this codified, maybe getting a little bit more resources would be a great idea, since we're going to share up and down. And so you can see kind of the spread. 5.6% is what's being drafted, and 8% was what was asked for. But we're really, really excited about this because it just feels so much more stable as we move forward. Just take one step away from those mineral royalties and severance taxes. Next slide, please. Of course, there's the impacts of further property tax reform. How many people listened to or watched the Joint Revenue Committee's work last week? They were hard at work. There's a lot going on. And so it's really great to see so many different options being considered. There's multiple drafts of bills that are in progress right now. One of the things that they spent a lot of time talking about last week was a bill that would replace residential property taxes with an additional 2% state sales and use tax distributed to replace property tax. And I am paraphrasing that a little bit because that's not quite how it works. It's more of a writer. So I want to make sure that I say, yes, I realize that for purposes of the presentation tonight, we just want to expose you to this idea, to this concept. And so when you look at the numbers, like all in, like number to number, that actually makes a lot of sense. And so as I thought about that, I was like, well, what are some of the cons of this maybe? And really what I can advise you is that, these local sales and use taxes comprise a significant portion of funding for municipalities. And so for the city of Laramie, for 2026 revenue, the fifth penny is 20% of the general fund budget, while property taxes are only 7%. And if we look, we have received 42 million for capital investment from the 2018 specific purpose tax. And so these local option taxes are really important. And that's really the con I was thinking about, is I thought, if we do replace this revenue source with the 2 additional % of state sales and use tax, where does that leave our local optional taxes in the minds of voters? We're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. And I think that voter education would be really critical if we decide to reform taxes in this manner, because these are such significant sources of local government funding. Next slide. This slide I threw in last night as I was thinking about some of the conversations at the Joint Revenue Committee last week. And one of the comments I heard in particular was something to the effect of, governments really aren't being responsible if they didn't cut services in relationship to that first round of property tax reductions. And so I really felt like I should throw this slide in and just say, if you look at our budget book, I think what you'll see in Laramie at least is that we didn't have to cut because I had never increased our revenue forecast to include property tax at the level at which they were being collected, because we've heard for a long time that this funding source might be reduced. And so if you actually look at our budget book in Laramie and you look at those amounts, the forecast for property tax revenue, and those forecasts are really how you're funding your budget, because you're forecasting expenditures and you're forecasting revenue and you're disclosing any reserves that you use and what you use them for. You can see that in Laramie, we didn't have to cut because we hadn't inflated that revenue forecast. And so I just wanted to get that out there for our local delegation to say, I think there's another way that we could talk about this. There's also maybe if people were forecasting the increases, then it would be true that you would think that there would be some reductions that would come in after that. So just kind of a neat point from Laramie. We also wanted to point out to you that based on the 2024 cost of government, I haven't quite done these numbers yet for 2025, but Laramie has the lowest operating cost of government for any full service municipality in the state. And if I am correct, I believe that we offer the broadest array of services. City Manager Jordan, is that correct? That's what I thought. And so for a community with a fairly low per capita historic sales and use tax collection rate and other low revenues, I think that's pretty extraordinary that we're able to deliver the broad array of services that we deliver at a really low cost per capita compared to other Wyoming governments. And it's something I'm really proud of. And so as you go into the legislature and you're having conversations about tightening the belt, I was super happy to find this image. I just want you to know what's going on in Laramie, and I want you to know you can find this stuff yourself. You don't need to rely on me. You can look at our budget publications. You can look at our budget in brief from the last year, and you can see for yourself that this information is out there and is truthful. And I just want to remind you as you go into this session, I know how we all feel about inflation. It's awful. And it's impacted the government sector just like it's impacted your personal pocketbook. And in particular, it's affected the government sector in our capital construction. And so I was in a meeting last week for the Laramie Building Authority, and one of our local contractors said that he thought 50% was a reasonable estimate of the amount that construction costs had increased. And he was commenting that, once they go up, they don't ever come back down. And really, I feel like in some ways that's the environment we're in, because a lot of the work we do really is about investing back into the community with those big infrastructure projects, as well as the human capital that we invest in our community. Of course, there's been increased wage pressure, but that wage pressure is not as steep as we've seen in the inflation related to capital construction costs. Next slide, please. And I'd just like to close and say, from my perspective, I'm really excited to work together. And I think that's how all of us feel in the city of Laramie as staff members. We want you to know that we have been in the middle of a financial transparency initiative for at least 1.5 years now. We're in full swing. We understand that citizens have questions and concerns about government finances, and we don't want to ignore that. In fact, what we want to do is we want to actively engage with members of our community about the questions and concerns that they have. Our open finance tool, if you haven't checked it out, you should check it out. I have some awesome business cards with me this evening. The city manager's budget advisory committee, we've got a member here this evening, and an open the books initiative that will be coming this spring are just part of our work in this area. And so it's something that we take seriously. We know that trust in government is kind of at a low, right? And there's a lot of maybe good reasons for that. But as your neighbors, as members of this community, as people who care about the public resources that we have stewardship over, we think this is really important work. And we think this is work that you should get involved in. It doesn't matter what your party affiliation is. We also just ask that you consider long-term impacts and data. And so there's nothing wrong. It can be really good to talk about changes to local government funding. There's nothing wrong with that. But as we do so, we encourage you to gather data and consider the long-term impacts across all Wyoming communities, not just Laramie. Because guess what? The impacts in one community may be different than us, and we want to make sure that you know that. We also want to make sure that you know that we're happy to be a source of objective data so that you can make decisions that are in the best interest of your constituents. And so if you come to us for data, we'll have conversations about how you can know that that's accurate and how you can know it's reliable. And to the extent possible, I'll show you where to find it so you really can feel confident in it. And finally, we would also just say that we would very much appreciate the legislature being a partner in public education if major changes to the tax structure are approved, because we feel like that would be really important. Happy to answer any questions. And if you don't have any, I would turn the presentation over to Community and Economic Development Director Team.
Are there any questions for Director Lee? Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I thought part of the reason that the property tax cut didn't hurt the city as much because we have this huge wind project coming on board, which is bringing increased revenues and supplementing that. And without that, we would have seen more devastating cuts.
Representative Provenza, actually, if you look at the budget book, what you'll see from our funding structure is that a lot of that reason is because we simply weren't forecasting the revenue at the increased rate. Now, the one-time collections do certainly help, but we are investing most of that in capital. And so as it relates to property tax, just because those dollar amounts were lower, it was really more about not having the revenue forecast up at the inflated level, so we didn't have to make the reductions.
That my belief, Director Wade, is that property tax in the county of those wind farms is not actually collected on the mills that are allowable to municipal government. So that doesn't necessarily have a significant impact on the municipal government property tax forecast. Now it does have that impact in Laramie County, but the one-time distribution is based on sales tax as the wind energy equipment is taxed as it comes off the rails, which is here in Laramie County, which has been a significant increase for us, but it is just one time that will not continue.
So then what happens when the 50% dollar initiative passes?
That's a different story. And so what you would see, if you look at the last budget book, is that we've got, I think, 2.1 million or something like that forecasted in property taxes. And that should keep us steady through maybe the 50%, maybe. We would maybe need to drop a little bit below that. Of course, if it goes away, it's another issue entirely. And so please don't make the mistake of thinking I'm making light of it. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments I heard in committee and say, for the city of Laramie in particular, we just haven't really increased that revenue forecast to be up at our current collections.
Further questions or comments? Okay. And next, welcome Director Team.
So I'm just gonna do what works, so I gotta stand off to the side. If you looked at the little survey that we did, right? 15 people that filled out the survey had housing as the number one issue. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about housing. what I wanted to do is kind of provide just what are we seeing right now in Laramie? What is our health? And I'm kind of equating this in like kind of in the medical field. And so in 2015, we did a study that we estimated we need about 4,000 housing units by 2030. We in Laramie build around 50 to 60 new units per year. Now we see bumps depending upon if we have a multifamily complex come in. So we'll have years where we'll see maybe 50 units come in with a 50 unit building in addition to those 50 or 60 units. But really on average, we're looking at 50 to 60 units. Since 2015, we're looking at 553 single family housing units. It's the majority of the housing that we see not only in Laramie, but for the most part across Wyoming. We have 251 multifamily housing units, totaling up to 804 units. Below here, though, what we believe is we're looking at still an estimated 2,500 more housing units needed, but that's only if we're including lots that we know are about ready to be built. So the infrastructure is available, the lots have been platted, or the lots already exist for whatever reason, they're ready for a building permit essentially. And including 600 lots in a preliminary plat stage. And what's important for tonight is they have entitlements, right? They're ready to be built if the developer so chooses. So it's up to the developer if they want to move forward with those 600 units. So what we need to know about this number is simple, is that we are behind. We're not keeping pace with the number that we estimated, which is at 4,000. We're making headway. We're getting more lots on the market. But in reality, we're still behind and we're probably not going to beat that 2030 threshold. The story I'm telling you today is not much different than almost every community in the state of Wyoming. When I talk with my colleagues, when I talk with other professionals, whether they're in the construction industry, whether they're a developer from Wyoming or from elsewhere, and they do business in this state, this is the story. It's a different number, different projections, but in reality, everybody's behind when it comes to housing. We are growing, which I think is important to note. Remember, not all communities in the state want to grow. We are seeing that growth. We are seeing a lack of affordable renter and owner-occupied housing, particularly, like it says here, low and moderate income households. That's your workforce. That's your everyday person that's doing general work in the community. That's where we're missing housing. You'll also see this statistic, more of our housing is almost 50 years old or older. This is also very common across the state of Wyoming. What this means is that houses need money to be invested in them to make them to buildable or maybe to a standard that can be sold or rented out. And so that potentially impacts your rentals and stock. In Laramie, we have high home prices. Director Wade touched on this. Water, sewer, and transportation infrastructures costs are limiting development. As we know, those costs have continued to rise, and that is typically passed on all the way through the development process, whether it's someone buying a lot and someone that's selling that house on it to maybe one of us. Next slide. Absolutely.
Go back to the slide here about the population's growing. What's driving the growth? I know the university is the biggest employer right now, but it's actually below its historic high enrollments and high employment. It's kind of leveled off, but I don't see that that's driving growth. What is driving the growth that we take from here?
So we are seeing economic growth in development. We have new businesses coming to town that are bringing people. We are also seeing retirees come to this community. Wyoming in total is seeing people wanting to retire here, mostly because of the low tax base, right? And so we are seeing that. It's also in some of our more rural communities, it's very cheap to live. Housing is extremely cheap, and so that is something that's drawn people. But in Laramie, we are seeing that economic growth, mostly because of business growth. I think also too, we, during that 2020 period of COVID, we saw a huge number of remote workers. Remote work, I think, is a asset that Laramie has because of the educational environment that we have here. People looked to that and saw that there was an opportunity. And we did see a lot of people come for that reason as well. I think that that's generally what's driving growth. We also have people who want to live here for the outdoors, the amenities, and the quality of life that Laramie does provide. It's easy to get around. You can run to your kid's school for over your lunch hour and check in if you need to, or go to a play or whatever. That doesn't happen even in Cheyenne anymore. And I think that there's a high quality that people, their lifestyle that they enjoy about being here. So. Questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The one thing I don't see out there is electricity supply in Laramie. I know that we're right at the edge of running out of electricity. We want to continue to grow, and I just want to make sure we don't forget that we need to figure out that, well, Rocky Mountain Power brings some power, more power, and it's not sufficient, in my opinion, anyway, to get us to where a lot of us think we got to get to. And so I just don't want us to forget we've got to increase power availability in this community. Thank you.
So what are we actually doing? And I think that what's important about this is that we are realizing that we can't just sit idly by and not do anything. And I think Laramie is an example of exactly doing the opposite. Since 2015, the city of Laramie has been focused on housing. I would say day to day out of my office, we're spending 50% of our time on housing related topics and issues because it's that important. We've done a series of studies, some of these studies even coming out of the state of Wyoming to provide us numbers and information. What we're seeing is even the study that we did in 2015, our current numbers of the most latest state study, which was done just this year, exact same trends, exact same numbers. We're seeing the same thing happen. We need more housing. And so what has Laramie done? We did a really important endeavor, which was what we call it the Laramie Code Audit. We looked at our code, took a critical look at how those codes may affect housing, and we changed them. We went through, we changed codes in pretty much every single residential zoning district, reduced setbacks, reduced lot size requirements, increased height, reduced parking requirements. We permit ADUs. We've essentially eliminated single family zoning in the city of Laramie to provide for additional housing options. All of these things here that we've done are all in an effort to increase the ability for somebody to possibly do housing.
Councilor, Dr. T, would you let everybody know what ADUs are?
Absolutely. The accessory dwelling units. And for Laramie, what that means is if you have a property that is located in one of our single family zoning districts, so we have 3 different zoning districts that are single family. We permit someone to put essentially what a lot of people refer to as like a mother-in-law suite in your home. This gives you the ability to set housing within your property. Not every house, not everybody wants to actually have one of these, but this does provide for that affordance within those single family zoning districts. In our other zoning districts, additional units are permitted on properties, so it's not really called maybe you, but it does open up that door and that ability for people. We are also in addition to code changes, we are looking at things like we've adopted rental housing standards. We've established an urban renewal authority. I think this kind of talks to Director Wade's conversation about funding sources. Urban renewal authorities are a permission given through statute to allow us to generate revenue locally at a level within a certain defined area. It's basically property owners helping themselves. They can choose to be within that area and actually build up the property through local investment. The city of Laramie is taking that one step further. Our own property has been adopted in Laramie as one of the first planned project areas. It's the location of our former public works facility located on 4th Street. Our hope is through that urban renewal authority and through a public-private partnership that we will have apartment housing dwellings built there in order to address some of our housing needs directly. We are looking, if some of you in this room all participated in our Laramie Housing Coalition Working Group. Out of that came our Albany County Housing Land Trust. This is another effort in creating a group of people that want to focus on housing and how do we improve. And so that's another issue or another thing that we've come out of there. We've also, as the city of Laramie, have put together the City of Laramie Housing Infrastructure Programs to fund to help with infrastructure related to housing. And with the goal and the understanding that our development is being restricted when it comes to some of our infrastructure costs, the cost to build these things. And so we're hoping that this fund can help catalyze that development. Next slide. Look, you went one far. Thank you. There we go. So really, what's the future? Like I said, I don't think that the work's done. I think that we're going to be focused on housing at least for the foreseeable future. I believe that that is going to change depending upon outcomes maybe at the state level, also at our national level, but also things that we're talking about and the things that are happening here and there. A lot of things are not in our control. For instance, one of the large things that we continue to hear about is financing. Financing isn't largely controlled by the city government. It's not controlled by really any of us in the room unless you're actually paying or giving money out, right? So I think things like that we need to be aware of as a community and how some of those outside forces affect us. But we have a policy, at least within our office and with the city of Laramie, is we're going to continue to look at code changes. Not only our municipal codes, but potentially our international building codes, as well as looking at policy changes as to how we address housing in our community. We're really going to be focused on the urban renewal authority and creating additional plan and project areas. This is kind of, remember, this is the property owners helping themselves in generating revenue for the area. Rental housing standards, mobile home park standards. I think we brought this up in our last year, right? I think that is going to be a continued conversation. We're learning some things at the state level in terms of electrical that start to affect our mobile home parks and may make upgrades required in certain areas. Our Albany County Housing Land Trust, I think, is also going to be another great partner in helping us kind of promote different housing options within the community. I think that their role right now is an evolving role, and also they're in their infancy. So I think that I'm excited just to see where they take us and where they can provide help in the area of housing. We mentioned an infrastructure program. This year, we also kicked off a new housing permit fee deferral program with a small project that we had. Essentially delaying fees that are required to be provided to the city to be in the project. What does that do? It allows for a property owner or developer to not have to carry those permit costs through the life of the project, but just pay them at the end. We're hoping that helps catalyze some of our larger projects where permit fees can be expensive on multi-million-dollar housing projects. And then I'm gonna kind of round out with two things kind of that are more related at the state level. So one, the Wyoming Business Council Infrastructure Program. We believe that that is an important aspect of how local communities can fund some of those infrastructure projects that not only promote maybe a specific project that we're dealing with, but also provide some of that catalyst to the broader community, maybe providing sewer, water services, road services beyond even the project that they're investing in. And then the investment in Wyoming housing bill. This is another important bill that puts us on an even playing field with other states. If we do not believe that we are in a competition with other states, we're fooling ourselves. Developers are no longer just working in their hometown or their home state. They're looking for the best investment across the nation, maybe even outside of our nation, to try to do what's right for their business. This gives us an opportunity to invest in housing in our state and, like I said, put us on that even playing field with other states that have the exact same program. Maybe funded at a different level, at least right now, but hopefully over time we can build that as well. So with that, like I said, housing is going to be a topic that we will be talking about probably at our next meeting next year with all of you. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, and I think I'm turning this over to Tom. So.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see the housing deferred program. I know you and I talked before about getting the utilities to do the same thing. You know, so putting in water and not water, to say, but gas and electricity and those type of things to get where they would defer to them and under the same time program. So any update on that, or it's more of a complicated issue, but any update?
Yeah, you know, then I tried to summarize, right, all the housing topics. Senator Crum and I, when we were doing housing coalition work, we talked a lot about franchise utility infrastructure. That is a changing environment right now in the development world. Those fees are costing developers more and more money. And so the days of just having power, cable, gas just show up to your development just really isn't happening anymore. And so those costs really have to be passed along. And so we spent some time kind of talking about that. I think it's an ongoing conversation. I haven't solved it yet. I wish I could tell you that I solved it, but I think as we both know, we were still working on that. We're still engaging with those franchise utilities.
Yeah. Representative Benson.
Thanks. You mentioned mobile home park standards, and one thing that comes to mind that I've had a conversation with some of the tenants there is the concern for the increased requirements means that they can more easily justify rent going up. And I know that some of these tenants have seen the 300% more increase in their rent in the last couple of years. And so I think I'd be curious what requirements you want to bring up, and then what can we do to ensure that those tenants aren't being priced out of their homes because they quite literally have nowhere else to go. I think it's a good thing. I'm not, saying that there aren't things that need to be done, because I think there was a mobile home park just outside of town that you talked about electrical issues. They have been illegally updating the electrical there, and everyone had to be vacated out of that space. So and there is a delicate balance. I'd be curious if there's other ways that you think you can combat what will surely come, which is the lash of the landlords that are going to increase that rent.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's mobile home parks or really any housing, I would say that there's going to be the balance between what level of requirements you have, safety or not, versus having a subset of standards that you believe that all people would need to have for their housing. And so that's going to always be a balance. Mobile home parks typically are our area where we do have some of our lowest income people living in. We know that. And what we've seen over the last 10 years, so the city of Laramie's had global park standards for going on almost 10 years. More recently, change in ownership and investment groups that have purchased mobile home parks seems to be where a lot of the fees are coming in and the higher cost, so least cost of renting your space. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're providing more services. And also, at least in Laramie, it doesn't mean that it was because of standard changes, because we haven't done anything recently in those standard changes. When we do talk about standard changes, one for Laramie, what we're looking at is looking at some of the requirements that may open up the ability to build some of these mobile home parks to make, I would call it incremental changes to better the park in total. Currently, the way some of the codes are written, it's kind of an all or nothing situation. And I think that puts property owners in a little bit more of a difficult scenario of, well, the only way I can afford this is to raise rents at a really high rate to get enough revenue to make all these changes. So I think there's some things like that we're looking at, as well as the cleanup codes, but then also to just general safety standards. Right now, we require all rentals to have safety standards, and I think that, you know, with mobile home parks, we kind of want to have a similar standards so that there's an expectation of life, health, and safety still living in our community. So,
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Can you just, for folks learn, just a like super quick description of a housing land trust?
yes, housing land trust. A housing land trust is typically set up as an arm to the government, I'm going to say, to aid in providing housing in some capacity or other. Typically, a housing land trust, whether it's through donations, grants, or other mechanisms, starts to acquire property, or it might be a building, it might be a couple of units, to start building a portfolio, if you're thinking in investment terms, that they then use. So the revenue, instead of their revenue going to somebody that owns the company, it goes back usually into the housing land trust to promote housing. Now, it might not just be purchasing properties, it may be providing income rates, so providing money back to somebody that's using one of their units, but also might be investing in broader projects, maybe helping a developer with tax credits, maybe studies or economic reports. A housing land trust, as it grows, gets typically beyond just owning land and owning units, but really they're an arm to become kind of a pro-housing group for your community and really efforting those housing initiatives, but also to providing support not only to local government, maybe when we're doing code changes or policy, but also to the state in terms of laws or bills that you think you consider. So I don't know, was that good enough?
Eric, if you could describe the housing interest in its rawest form about how the land trust works, what the provision of housing and what it produces for the acquisition of housing.
Maybe Todd Feeser should say nice and
Our Albany County Housing Land Trust, although it is called a land trust, is probably not going to focus on just the land trust model itself. In the land trust model itself, the nonprofit agency holds ownership of the land, and you typically just own the structure. Very similar to what you see out in the National Forest. A lot of folks in the Star Range Mountains own a cabin, but they don't own the land. They have a lease to that land. And so there is some sort of payment that comes off the lease to that land that actually goes back to the Housing Land Trust to propagate its further acquisition of land. And that's probably the biggest, that in its true form, how a land trust works, is it reduces the cost of burden of owning land before you own a home to get you in there. And you still get to gain equity and value in the home structure that you own. It will obviously go up, but when you do sell, the only thing you sell is your rights into that home. You don't sell the land. The land continues to stay with the land trust.
Trusting the perpetuity to the. That's exactly what I was saying.
Further questions or comments? Senator Rumpus.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two different questions related to the city's role in the cost of infrastructure moving forward. So the idea of adding 4,000 units over the next 5 years, I think we all agree that should be done. But when we start looking at the economics of it, I'm curious, what is the cost for the additional required infrastructure that the city of Laramie would have to bear to bring online 4,000 additional units within the city of Laramie? I assume that those estimates are out there. Where would that revenue come from? That seems like a significant challenge for the city. And assuming that we could get that amount of money, one question I wonder about is the carrying cost of additional housing units, right? A lot of the tax revenue for the city does come through the state, through the state distribution. And I'm wondering if a new housing unit, we'll say just a single family home, is a net asset or a net liability in terms of revenue and cost for the city of Laramie. I would assume it's a net liability based on how our tax and revenue structure works. And I assume it's almost a substantial net liability, but I don't know that. I studied that state level, but not the city level. Do you have any thoughts on that?
At the city level, it's a net liability. A large net liability, and I'm not sure if we have the number just like off the top of our head, but it's fairly substantial. When it comes to infrastructure, here's what I would say: development 101, right? The developer comes in, they evaluate their property, what types of roads they need to put in, what types of water, sewer lines, infrastructure, and they run the calculations, they figure out how many lots they've got, then they equate that to whatever revenue they would like to generate on their project, and then that's how much those lots typically sell for. And what at the city level, I think what we have to look at is, are we willing to modify our standards, road standards, sewer, water standards, infrastructure, fees, whatever it is, to promote housing. But to what level we do that does not come with no consequence, right? If you build a road that is less robust, we may have to replace that road sooner. That means that our public works department may have to budget and understand what that looks like in terms of their capital improvement plan. And so those are going to be things that we continue to always evaluate as to try to to what level do we need to build that infrastructure. And it's more recently it's been difficult because of the rising costs. So yeah.
Can I follow up quickly, or did you have it?
Follow up.
Thank you. So the question I had isn't as much towards the developer side, but all of the collection infrastructure, we'll say. So they're feeding into city infrastructure, and they're not building the city infrastructure that they feed into. So when you're talking 10 houses, it's not going to require a change in the city infrastructure. But when you're talking 4,000 new units, now we start thinking, all right, we need some dramatic changes to core infrastructure that the city itself is using to support that much infrastructural change. So that's where I'm looking at, how does the city find the resources? And I can't point to anything specific, but I'm sure we've got people in this room that know exactly what needs to be done to upgrade, central stormwater, water processing, and everything else. So not just the development roads and developments, stormwater and water services, but what has to be upgraded at the city level to support 4,000 homes.
So what I'll speak to is in Laramie, what we do is we have a coordinated effort between our departments to try to make plans for that scenario. This number, 4,000 units, isn't a mystery, right? We've known since 2015 that this has been something that we needed to do. So I'll speak when our public works department is working on the water master plan, 2018 wasn't, like 2017, 2018. what did they do? They came to our office, they spoke with our different divisions within the city of Laramie to try to understand what do we need to be projecting that infrastructure to, so that here in 2025, the infrastructure that they've installed is preparing for that eventual growth. Now, it's not always done in exactly the right place. There are times where we maybe miss the mark. But I mean, our whole intent through our capital planning process is to ensure that we are installing infrastructure based upon that projected growth and economic development that we need, because otherwise you're observing the exact same thing that we don't want to do. Is we don't want to install infrastructure for something like a water line 5 years ago. And then because the development occurs, go, well, I guess we need to take it all out, right? That's what we did. So we're trying to prepare for that. I think we have a team that does a good job with that and trying to anticipate those changes, the growth, the development, where it's going to occur. And so that's what your hope is. But it is sometimes very difficult to do because you don't know a developer that maybe wants to see growth, is ready to develop today, might not be where we put infrastructure. Right? And so, but we do our best there. So, you know.
Councilor O'Grady.
I wanted to add, it's why we're trying to get more dense housing, so that way that water line costs less per unit than if everybody needs a 60-foot road front. Thank you.
Councilor Freed.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess just a comment to the folks in this room, but thinking about 4,000 houses, or single-family homes, multi-family homes, I think that could potentially really change the shape of certain neighborhoods in our communities. And I think we've, heard some pushback just from certain zoning changes, and the idea if we build denser housing units in certain areas that we're going to still feel some pushback, I think. So maybe just trying to put it out there that as we continue to look for housing solutions, to be on the same page with how we're communicating to the public about the need. I mean, these numbers, if you see this and you're part of the community, you see what we need to do. But then I think if someone's had a view of something and now we're going to put, a multi-family housing unit there, that's never been there. That's a change. And, I think we need that. We need to have housing, but I think it's a conversation that we need to continue to be on the same page with.
Further questions or comments?
Absolutely. I believe Director Brooks Webb has some information related to capacity for water treatment.
Yeah, good evening, Brooks Webb, Public Works Director. But we're banking on these 4,000 units not coming all at one time. First of all. But just to let you know, I mean, as far as when we're projecting our 10-year capital plan, our 10-year master plans and things like that, we're looking at the current growth and expected growth, right? A lot of the projects that we've been doing, we've spent tens of millions of dollars over the last 5, 6, 7 years in infrastructure for the future. The North Tank, which we just completed, $20 million project, a big portion of the project was for water storage capacity for development to the north, right? That wasn't just built for the existing infrastructure, that was built for the future. The upsizing of the B2 line down by Spring Creek, the upsizing of the C line down 6th Street or whatever. The upsizing of all those sewer lines, that's for the future development that we know is coming. We have a north outfall sewer line that's set to go in on the north side of town to handle that development. So we're looking toward that future as we build it out. We just finished a $9.5 million upgrade at the wastewater treatment plant to help that, and part of that will help with the capacity there. But the capacity we have at the wastewater treatment plant now, we can double what we're doing now. Our water portfolio is huge. I think water-wise, we're really good. So we are in Public Works constantly looking for the future. Most of our projects lately have been really geared toward development. Even if we're just going in and doing a rehab project, maybe fixing an old line, if you will, we're looking at, do we need to also upsize that for any future development here?
Some areas are fully developed out, we don't need to do that, but if it's in an area that's gonna collect, an area that we think is going to be developing in the future, we can upsize during the process.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Any further questions or comments? Okay, Director Wayne.
Just to send her Rob, this is a question earlier, because Todd and I were both back here. We think you asked such a good question about is it an asset or a liability or is it neutral? I think we're not sure we totally agree. There's always a liability. And I feel like it's important we say that. And as I was listening to Director Webb speak, I was thinking about the Northside Tank, and I was thinking about all the grant funding we got from the state of Wyoming and how the Office of State Lands and Investments actually worked to, I think, give us some, rescue funding from, I forget the state. Oh, SLFRF. Yeah, I forget what all those things mean. And so if you can be smart, if we have state agencies that are willing to partner with us and we're forward thinking, hopefully we can go about this development in a way that it isn't a liability, because you're right. If you fund it just with cash, it's a tremendous liability. But if you're able to be strategic about your funding, if you're able to get maybe not grants, but loans with really low interest rates that we can amortize over maybe 30 years, and we're being thoughtful about that, I think there is a way to do this that can make sense to fill this real need for our community.
Senator Ingram.
I think we need to remember too, we need more apartment buildings, we need dense housing, but at the same time, I think as we plan our community, we need all types of housing. Make sure that we just don't lock ourselves into this mindset of we need this type of housing and forget about others. I think that's what we've done in the past. We built one type of house and forgot another type, and I just don't think we should all of a sudden build this other type and forget this type. It's a broad-based approach to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Ruffus.
And just a quick follow-up on the liability conversation. I don't mean to sound like we don't want to bring people in, but we did a study at the state level based on our entire tax structure and the way that they bring in revenue. Almost everybody we bring into the state is a liability for the state relative to the revenue they generate for the state. So the analysis that I'm looking at, I haven't seen that for individuals at the city level. I don't know the data. But yes, when we bring in 1,000 new manufacturing jobs, you would think that would be a wonderful thing for the state of Wyoming. It is a huge net liability on the state of Wyoming to bring in 1,000 manufacturing jobs, because we have no sales tax on manufacturing. We have trivial property tax on that, and individuals don't typically pay their way. So that was the concern I have with adding 4,000, is that creating more of a liability for our community that is unfunded. And it's unfunded not because of anything that our city or county do, it's unfunded because of the earlier discussion we had, which is the tax policy written by the legislature, which does not make your life easier. So that's what I want to understand as we go into these discussions about tax policy. If you're trying to grow and our tax policy constrains you so that you can't in the future sustain the services you're providing right now, because adding more people to our community actually hurts the community instead of helps it. That's the type of thing that we need to know as legislators. We need to have the data for that, because when we do go discuss the idea of eliminating the property tax and replacing it with a sales and use tax, I would sure like to know that data.
I'll just say, I'll leave it with this as I bring Todd up here. Housing is an asset for our community. Don't get me wrong. Housing drives our economy. It's a place where all of our business people live. It's where our retirees will live. It's where our young families will be. We have to have housing in order to promote that economic driver in our community. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Derek. I've just got a few more slides before we turn this over to your roundtable, but a few of them are things that have become important to me. For those of you that don't know me, I've been in municipal government for a little bit right under 30 years now. I've got experience in Casper, Cheyenne, and Laramie. All experiences have been great. I've really enjoyed this community living in. It's a lot of fun. When I think about what you guys see ahead of you as you come into your legislature, I want to talk about the importance of local control. And the Wyoming State Constitution actually speaks directly to this, and I'm sure all of you are aware of that. It's Article 13, Section 1, and it talks about the legislature shall provide by general law applicable to all cities and towns for the incorporation of cities, of which Laramie, Wyoming is. All cities and towns are hereby empowered to determine their local affairs and government as established by ordinance passed by the governing body. And that's very important to us because the importance of local control, and I'll describe it later. Now, we do realize that we are under statutes uniformly applicable to all cities. We always refer to state statute, whether it's 15 or 16, or if there's a little conflict between 15 or 16 that you may be aware of now. But we do always refer to and make sure to try to ensure that we are legal by state statute with what we're doing in the operation. Now, when it comes to local control, the important thing to keep in mind is I hear a lot, and it's over the past few years, there's been a lot of discussion about transparency. And it's always seemed like that discussion's been about the constituents down to the councilors and then down to the city. And they act like it's a one-way funnel. I actually believe that our funnel goes both ways because our staff is out there in the community. We're a part of this community. We're a fabric of the community. Our counselors are this fabric of the community. Not all communication about local control comes from the constituents to our counselors to staff. Sometimes it comes from our constituents to staff of the counselors. And so it goes both ways. And you guys are going to deal with this too in the legislature. You're going to hear from everybody. But keep in mind that the communication, the importance about local control is that I truly believe my department directors, who are all here tonight, and I should have taken the time to introduce them and do that now. I've got Fire Chief Dan Johnson, Director Webb, Public Works, Jonathan Rhodes, Information Technology, Jen Wade, Administrative Services Director, Derek Taney, Community Development Director, Janine Jordan, our City Manager, Brandon Mullins, our Management Analyst, and Michael Orks, our Parks and Recreation Director, and representing the Police Department tonight is Tom Smith, our Assistant Chief, who's only been the Assistant Chief for about 2 months now. Since June. Since June. Oh, congratulations. Congratulations. But that's the importance of local control, is that I do truly believe that our staff is cognizant. We hear from the constituents. We know what they're talking about. We're trying to bring stuff up to raise it to policy matters so that our council can react to those. It doesn't always go from the constituents to our councilors. Next slide, please. The importance of cooperation, and we really do rely on this a lot. In fact, I'm even pushing on this a little bit right now with Albany County School District is Wyoming State statute actually gives us the authority to cooperate not only with other entities in Wyoming, when you're talking about the tribes and the nations, but other states and the federal government. One of the places that this is most important is oftentimes bids. How many people have been involved in the bid world? Oh, very good. All my staff's like, oh yeah, absolutely. Councilor Freed has been. It's exhausting, it's daunting, and it's a lot of work. A lot of times bids are completed under the same circumstances by another community, maybe in Kansas or someplace else. Case in point, the lights that we've recently put on 3rd Street, which is feather in my cap right now, those new pedestrian lights that went in. We actually purchased those under a cooperative agreement that is allowable by this state statute. And we didn't have to go through the bid process. We were able to just take the same company that's in Wyoming that provides those products and use the bid that they won in Kansas to purchase those lights at the same price that they paid for them in Kansas. And so it worked in our favor to reduce the amount of staff time and speed up the speed of government in order to get those purchased and get those in. It really happened in lightning speed, where a full bid was accepted, approved by council, and in place within about 2 months. And that's very rare for that to happen. And so the importance of cooperation is important. And I love to pull little pieces of state statute when they work for me, and then ignore the other pieces that don't, right? But this one's super important, and we'll be pushing on the school district about the authority to cooperate when it comes to the acquisition and disposition of land when we're trying to improve things in the community. So you can give me the next slide. And then for me to end it on, it's about the importance of communication, and what I envision that you will all have when we come out of this is I plan on giving you direct contacts, email contacts with all of our council members, with all the staff, So that as you're going through legislature, you can contact us immediately, say, hey, this is coming through, how do you feel, what does it make? And we'll all work on that in open lines of communication. Now, remember, it goes both ways. I'm gonna contact Representative Ocean, is it Representative Ocean Andrew? I'm gonna contact you and say, hey, this is coming through, this is what it would do to us, would you please consider that? And that's the way we're gonna work, is we're gonna have open lines of communication both ways. One of the things that council is maybe not aware of, so I'm probably gonna lean on them a little bit more about lobbying. Because it's gonna really be important. I think it's more important for elected to hear from electeds. Staff can give you data and other stuff, but the electeds can give you the emotion behind it, and that's gonna be the important thing. So we're gonna empower our electeds with the information to bring the emotion and help you guys make your decisions as we move through the legislature. With that being said, I don't think we go to the last slide yet. I think this is where I turn it back to Mayor Cumbie to drive the roundtable, and staff's here to answer any questions that you may have. And we're happy to participate or just listen in so that we can prepare for policy situations as they come forward. I do want to say one thing before I go, and I don't say this lightly, but as Director Webb indicated, the development of our water treatment and the foresight to develop water rights through the purchase of the model of the BAB, the historic BAB, the historic Heart and Bath Ranch. You know, that's Janine Jordan. That's what 20 years of standard city management give you. And she really deserves a big round of applause for this.
All right, so, questions, comments? I'm just wondering with our representatives, what thoughts you all might have, or what you might want from us, or things that initiatives that you think we need to know about or be active about. Is there some feedback that you want to give to us? Senator Ruffus.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I do think that for this session, it's very empowering for us to know the implications of proposals that we're going to be considering. So for example, the tax proposals, which I think will be significantly impactful for the community in the long run, understanding exactly what those do in terms of revenue. You know, we do, it was pointed out in an earlier presentation, that we operate on some of the lowest revenue per capita and manage to have incredible services with very low revenue per capita. That means that some of these cuts are going to affect us more, but we would like to be armed with that information. And I think I've told everyone before, you know, nice one-pagers that are 90% data that just paint us that picture so that we're ready when we get to that debate. Is the handiest. We never know when the debate's going to come up, but it's great to draw upon those. And we appreciate over the years the many times that we've had those developed by the staff of Laramie as well as the county providing those. I know that I use them each and every year. So I'll just once again ask for that to provide us with that information. And when you see legislation that is of specific concern, sounds like we'll be hearing from you about that, and that's always very valuable as well. We're watching for it, but it doesn't mean we always see it because we're not necessarily scrutinizing the legislation in the same way that you are with regard to how it affects your capacity to govern the city. So anytime you catch something, let us know, let us all know. And during session in particular, when things come up, they come up quickly, so the sooner we hear.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Crum.
Just on the Senator Ross's comment, you know, call us at any time or email us. The one pager, shorter the better. Bullet points, assistant city manager out there, awesome. But when you call too, sometimes if you have a solution, sometimes it's the answer's not yes or no. There's something in the middle, and if you have that something in the middle, that really helps a lot to know what you're thinking and possibly what a solution to the problem may be, other than just a flat yes or no kind of thing. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you. Representative Chestnut.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I had a question. Don, one of the slides you showed was the constitutional provision is kind of quasi home rule. It's not really a home rule, but it's sort of like a home rule. Now, it says that the local cities and local governments are empowered to determine the local affairs, except for certain things, like levying of taxes, excise fees, or other charges shall be described in the legislature. Which I wonder how much that hurts you. I mean, I'm glad to hear that the property tax cut that has been invoked by the legislature has not yet really directly affected us. Director Wade can give some details on that. I'm not sure it's going to be a long-term solution. I think that eventually it's going to catch up with it. But this provision of the Constitution that says the legislature can cut your revenue, and you just have to live with it. You don't have, is there any talk or thoughts about a constitutional amendment to give local governments real home rule where they could actually take control of their own revenues and their budget? Is there an appetite for that?
Representative Chestnut, that is a great question. Can I defer this to Janine? She offered tonight to allow me to defer anything to her. If I was to say anything, I think working within the state statutes has been something that had worked in the past, but is there a chance for some loosening or some lightening of the rules? I think absolutely about the levying. Not just a couple of years ago, it actually passed that allowance for local taxation authority for an additional penny, right? Am I right in that reasoning? But that's also a difficult thing to take on, because then we're talking about adding a 7 cent at the jeopardy of the existing 5th and 6th penny, which Director Wade showed was so popular to us. I also think there's a lot of stuff that the state does provide as far as structure for municipal governments, that if you talk about a constitutional amendment to remove that, may remove some of the state support that I believe all municipalities enjoy. But I'm certainly happy to defer this to Director Wade or City Manager Jordan if there's some other statements that are more.
Inside of it, I've been offered for those of you who may not be familiar with the municipal finance report from a few years ago. They really broke this down, and it was built on data from NCSL, which you all are familiar with. And I think recently when I had a lengthy conversation with the legislature about continuing to be members. But Wyoming is notable in that there is very minimal local control over revenues, as you said. Even the 7th penny, when you look at taxation policy across the nation, local governments, typically there's a three-legged stool, right? The elected officials have the ability to set the rate of taxation, determine the taxes. And so even our 7 cent, while it was certainly a win for cities to have a little bit more local control, that in none of the cases of our local option taxes did your local governing board get to vote those taxes in. They all have to go to the voters. So this three-legged stool, that's sort of the pure test of taxation authority, none of the three legs of the stool actually apply to local governments in Wyoming. Obviously, that's a constitutional issue, as Todd said, but I will say, as a longtime city administrator in the state, I do have concerns with the sort of piecemeal fashion that the legislature is taking to address taxation policy at the state level. And the trickle-down effects of that may have really dramatic and potentially very dire circumstances. These guys were very delicate and diplomatic in talking about, for instance, the potential loss of the local option pennies if the state differs with the state taxation rate of sales tax. But there's real jeopardy out there that could have detrimental effect to our communities, but more importantly to our citizens. So I would love to see, I think the WHAM report noted that cities would appreciate more autonomy for your local elected officials to set revenue. Political reality may mean that's never going to happen. But the piecemeal approach of reforming taxation at a state level is certainly concerning for cities, because we are reliant upon the legislature of the state in almost every way. So I'll stop.
I just want to make sure I'm not being misinterpreted this evening. And so our intention for Laramie is to tell you where Laramie sits based on what Laramie has done, not to communicate that we don't have concerns, like the city manager says, especially about piecemeal major changes to how local governments basically obtain revenue. We also think it would be a really good idea. I personally think it would be a really good idea to dive into some of the fears and concerns that are at the root of why local government doesn't have this control in Wyoming. And so that's one of the reasons I talked to you about Laramie and Laramie's financial condition and the things that we've done, because I think there's so much mistrust. I've heard so many times, and I'm going to quote my friend Jerry here, you give a government $1 and they spend $2, right? We talked about this on the city manager's budget advisory committee, and that's a real feeling. And so until we dive in and we really dive in, I think we're going to continue having these issues. And the worst case scenario is that some big changes happen in a piecemeal fashion, and then there's some unintended consequences, and some pretty important local services go unfunded. And certainly that will get the attention of people, but that's not a good way to run anything, government, business, anything.
Senator Berlinza.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at the local government direct distribution from the governor's office, and maybe this is something that the great appropriator can help me with if I'm misunderstanding, but it looks to me like the city of Laramie is taking a 22.8% cut from the governor's budget compared to the 2026 budget. Albany County is taking a 35.3% reduction. And so I hear the concerns that, we want to trust government, but I also think we should be honest that there's also an effort to take so many funds away from the government that it doesn't function. And so being honest about both sides of the different argument. And so I guess what I'm curious about, we're looking at property tax reduction in revenue. We're looking at a 22.8% reduction in our direct distribution. I need to be able to articulate to my constituents what the cause of programs are, like, what does this actually mean in bread and butter directly on the ground? And if there isn't anything that I can point to, why is that? So I guess that's my question.
Representative Bertens, I think it's fair to turn that question to Director Wade, so she can give you an idea about what the cut stems from. I have my own belief, but I am certainly not a finance director.
Yeah, I'll just admit, I like to speak about these things structurally in terms of how we fund the budget, because I think it makes the most sense. Regarding the cut to the direct distribution, I also was really sad to see that today for lots of reasons, but just quite candidly, we're used to the Madden formula, and that's a result of the Madden formula. And it's a result of us getting more one-time sales and use tax collections from wind energy development, and those have been significant to the city. So property tax, not so much, but sales and use tax, absolutely. And so the way that Madden formula is built, if you have a lot of variability, if you have a high year, you get less of the direct distribution. And so we've been managing the direct distribution as one-time revenue for quite a long time. And so the type of service reduction you would see, it's not necessarily less police on the ground, say, but it's less capital investment, because we manage that as one-time revenue. The same we do with all one-time collections. And so that's just something we've gotten really good at in Laramie. Because we're used to that funding structure. It doesn't mean we think that we love it. It doesn't mean we think we have maybe as much to invest in streets as we would like. But we also believe in running a government in a financially sustainable way over the long term. And so those are the realities within which we work. Same thing will be true for, so property taxes are a little bit different. Property taxes are considered an ongoing operating revenue source. And so I just checked my notes before this presentation and then after, we've been budgeting basically at the 2020 collection level for the past 5 years, because you hear conversations and these are ongoing revenues. And you don't want to build people's jobs on these increases, because then you end up cutting these jobs. That's the city manager has to go do reductions in force. And so the impact of reduced property taxes, beneath that $2 million level, 2.1, 2.2, that does start to cut into those operating services where you see things like streets, police, fire, maintenance, not those one-time types of expenditures. And so our budget in Laramie is very much built on ongoing revenue and ongoing expenditures, one-time revenue, one-time expenditures. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Councilor Nordy.
Representative Provenza, I think it also explains how we're so far behind in stormwater capital. Like we need, was it 30 million? Or is it 30 million?
130 million, I believe was.
Yeah, so that our needs for capital for stormwater and for streets, that's why we can't keep up with the streets and the stormwater.
Further questions or comments? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. I guess for those listening, just the bigger picture of direct distribution, there's two, we like to say, there are 2 horses in the race. So there are 2 options currently that the legislature will be considering when it comes to direct distribution funding for cities. One is the traditional direct distribution model, which is a standalone bill that has a biennial appropriation. As you had in your slide, this is for all municipalities and counties. 146 million was what the last direct distribution was. In comparison, the governor is recommending 105. So there's a $20 million shortfall across our state, again, for municipalities. So that is one option. The other option is something that the Appropriations Committee has been working on in the interim, having a conversation about changing the formula for sales and use tax. So how much does the state keep versus how much do we send back to the local governing bodies? So the concept is if we can get a number correct on the distribution of sales and use tax, the direct distribution goes away. So that standalone bill goes away. So that annual arguing over the standalone bill goes away and gives local government, in theory, more stability. Sales tax rises and falls, right? Same thing. WHAM and the county commissioners asked for 8%. Again, I think you had that called out here, which would be equivalent to the 146 million that was allocated in the last direct distribution. Unfortunately, with the way that bill is going to be coming out of committee right now is at 5.6%. That is the same as the 105 million. So both horses in the race have a $20 million shortfall. I hope if you have any questions, let me know. I have spreadsheets. You're welcome to look at those.
Senator Rumpus.
To Trey on this, was there discussion, looking at it statewide, it looks like it's equitable, but the direct distribution has the hardship distribution component, which recognizes that there's a significant disparity among communities in terms of their revenue and particularly on their sales and use tax, right? We have about 5 counties that bring in a truly tremendous amount, far more than need. And the per capita distribution in some of our counties and some of our cities around the state is literally 4 times what Laramie receives, 4 times as much money that they use to operate the government. This solution, while I certainly support the idea of trying to shift the responsibility of sales and use tax back to the communities more from the state share, it sounds like it would be at the expense of the hardship formula. And so our haves would have quite a bit more, and our have-nots, where we're sitting in one of the have-nots, would lose the, I want to say, $4.5 million of hardship that we get each year. Am I correct in that?
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. You may be the only person in the room who understands what's called the Madden formula. So how the money gets distributed. Please don't ask me that question, ask Senator Rothfuss. So the Madden formula is currently applied to the direct distribution. The bill that contemplates the 5.6% share of the sales tax coming back to communities uses the Madden formula. So the distribution formula would stay the same regardless of which horse makes it to the finish line.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Hull.
Further questions or comments? Senator Representative Chester.
More of a comment than a question, and I'd like to hear some conversation among city representatives here. I understand that there's some allure to going to the sales tax model because it's more stable and more predictable. But my personal concern is that what Senator Rothfuss alluded to, that it's very regressive. It hurts the people who can't afford to pay. It does not, it's terribly aggressive. So I'd like to hear some conversation from the city representatives here. Is the regressive nature of the sales tax something that would encourage you to stay with the more real estate tax situation?
Vice Mayor.
I don't know if I can answer the real estate tax portion of it necessarily, except for we rely, more on the property, residential property taxes rather than the minerals and that sort of thing here. But I am not a fan of shifting to the sales and use tax because of that reason. Because we have so many low-income people in Laramie, so many renters in Laramie, I understand that property taxes can be really tough when they start to get high. We all feel it, those of us who own homes, but we have that asset at least as something that's an asset. Whereas those folks who are, if we shift to the sales tax, we have a much larger number of low-income people in this community. They are paying it's regressive. They're paying a higher percentage of that tax. So I am not a fan of shifting it without some other. I think generally I'm just not a fan of it, but I don't know if there's a perfect answer, but I know that, yeah.
Mayor. To Representative Chestek's question, I think it's really important to think about the property tax and the replacement with sales and use tax separately, because that would be more sales and use tax. For Representative Sherwood's example, there would be actually no increase in sales and use tax at the state level. They would just divert, and we would have that replacement. And so from staff's perspective, that would actually be neutral to the taxpayer and actually beneficial to the community because we're not getting that direct distribution from mineral revenue.
Can you talk about that a little more in terms of like individual pain? Because I think I'm not fully understanding.
I actually would be more comfortable letting your kind of elected official stand there because, it's a brand new conversation. There's lots of conversation to be had. And I think that is more of an elected official conversation at this point.
You take the question again about the microphone.
Oh. Sorry, I had asked Director Wade if she could just expand on what she was talking about to kind of offset my thinking too. But I think she was looking at it more from community base and what was coming in versus my kind of personal opinion on it. Yeah?
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. The director was getting at the fact that there's two different topics that are being conflated a little bit that relate to sales and use tax. the sales and use tax proposal that the appropriations committee is looking at does not increase sales and use tax, nor does it decrease it. It just changed the distribution of existing sales and use taxes. So it would not be a regressive change in any way. It's simply shifting from, we're taking mineral revenue right now, and we would be taking sales revenue to pay the same bills for the city. Whereas the other discussion earlier is a concern of regressive policy, where we would be shifting from a real estate based or residential based property tax to a sales and use tax, which would be a regressive shift. And you would see, even though the numbers might balance statewide, they do not balance locally. It would be a truly incredible decrease in taxes in Teton County, while simultaneously significantly increasing taxes in Albany County. So, good example of that regressive behavior. Incredible tax cut for those that can afford it. Incredible tax increase for those that can.
Thanks for separating those two. I think that's where I was not. Oh.
Councilor Jordan.
I was wondering if the legislators would maybe provide some insight. The way I see like I can get a discount on my property taxes, and isn't that great? I've had my house over 30 years. So I do feel it when I have to pay in one lump sum that property tax. I'm happy to do it, but I feel it but I'm lucky enough to own my home right now. So the people that have mortgages, the people that are just getting into home ownership, and the people that are trying to get their foot in the door for home ownership, it doesn't provide that kind of help with the property taxes, right? It's going more towards those of us that own our houses are lucky. Don't think that's the way it's structured now.
Madam
Senator Rogers.
Both sides are typically expressed in the debate, but it has fallen the way that you're discussing, where the benefits tend to be those that are doing quite well and can benefit from those benefits. We obviously have some exceptions where we put in place some income standards. Those long-term homeowner allowances, we're trying to target those individuals that had relatively low income. And I believe there actually is a bill to extend that, remove the sunset. That bill could be more progressive, certainly could be written more progressive, but it is intended to help those that are on Social Security, have a low income, and that's the source of the policy interest there. The total expense of that bill is relatively small also compared to the overall 25% residential tax allowance, or the 50% that is pending. But yes, there definitely is and has been creep on all of those bills, where even if there is a formulation that directly targets those in need, by the end of the debate and by the end of the passage of the bill, it typically has substantially helped those that really don't need the support. With regard to those individuals that can't yet afford a home, honestly, it's very hard to write policy that benefits a renter. When you write policy that provides an allowance for a renter, that tends to just be swept by the landowner. So we really haven't cracked that nut yet. We talk about that frequently. What would that bill look like so that we could actually benefit a renter? And can we? I don't know. We've not figured that one out. Haven't seen legislation yet that works there. Would love to understand an idea that would actually benefit that renter, instead of just being, well, this individual is getting another $100. I'm going to take the $100.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Senator Crowe.
I think Senator Rothfuss is right, but this is a very complicated matter. He's a lot of conversation around it. Director Wade's comment about we need to look at the whole picture, just not piecemeal this thing. But on the other hand, too, you look at families getting into homes too, and real estate property taxes, that can make a difference whether you can buy a home or not on how much that property tax is too. So, there's two sides to the coin versus, is it sales tax regressive or is property tax regressive to that, the young homeowner or senior homeowner? So we've got to look at this thing in the big picture.
Thank you. Councilor Newman.
Just kind of waiting for the topic to change. So I have a question for Assistant City Manager, just so I can watch him walk back up there again, trying to get steps in place. Assistant City Manager, you said that you would lean on us very hard or harder to reach out to the senators and representatives. And I have a comment first and then a question. For the senators and representatives, I think you guys do amazing when we do reach out to you. I have conversations with all of you, it seems, and you guys all respond fairly fast. My question for you, Assistant City Manager, if you're going to get them a list of our contact information, will you get the same from them, just so it's easier for some of the newer council members who might not know that, and get that out to us, please?
Councilor Newman, absolutely. You may not know this, but coming to the council retreat that would be coming up as we prepare for the legislature, the intent is to try to get councilors to team up with different representatives and senators so that there's a continuity of conversation that runs through that. And we'll be working on that status through the mayor and vice mayor as we prepare for that retreat to line it up. But absolutely, the communication will go both ways.
Madam Mayor.
Senator Rathus.
Just a quick comment on that. I think over my time in the legislature, we've had a tremendously positive relationship between our delegation in the legislature and our city council, city staff, the county as well. And like no other in the state, really, I think we do the very best. So I appreciate that, and we'll continue to operate in capacity and welcome your calls, your texts, any contact that you have. We really appreciate it and benefit.
Thank you. Representative Schoen.
Madam Mayor, I will also add, we also appreciate memes that may make us laugh.
Yeah.
To that correspondence, because the days are long, the topics are challenging. Whoever gets assigned me, I would like cute photos of your animals, at least once a day before you have the session, please. Please, thank you.
I'll send you photos of my Great Pyrenees.
Yes.
Sweet as can be.
You will get them back too.
Thank you. Councilor O'Doherty.
Madam Mayor, I'm wondering what the legislators think of the gaming, things we could do about gaming. Is it just going to be unlimited or shut it down? I think we have 3 and 1 grand on Thursday right now. So maybe we could just be Las Vegas.
Yeah, maybe we can be Las Vegas. I don't have an educated answer for you right now. I know that we're looking at different regulations, and there are conversations that were last session. I don't think it made it to the finish line about giving more power to towns and counties about making decisions about those things. I'll tell you that my thinking and how I vote on these issues has changed quite a bit during my time in the legislature. I remember my first session voting to expand gaming. I don't think I will do that again. I don't think that we've had a thoughtful process. I think that I'm hearing from folks that one of the places in our community gives 6 free drinks while you're there to gamble. So I think that there's also a conversation about what do we do with liquor laws and ensuring that we're not setting people up for one addiction, but just general problematic behavior that comes with alcohol, as I'm sure our assistant chief of police is so well aware of, right? So I think the legislature knows at this point that we went too far. that we weren't thoughtful enough and we're walking backwards. I hope we have the appetite to do the real work, to walk back enough, because I think that the evidence is now pretty clear what happens in states where you allow gaming in the ways that we have. I think the average credit score in states that have allowed this type of gaming goes down like 20% or something. I mean, it's pretty devastating. And there's just no real option for people to win anything. So I don't know if that's what your concerns are, or if you really want us to make Laramie Las Vegas. Clearly, I won't be on that side with you, but I'm just sharing my concerns publicly because I think it's also a public conversation to have that I don't think that the legislature saw. Certainly, when I was voting on expansion in 2021, I was not hearing from my constituents, and I think if I had heard and known more of the research, I would have voted differently.
Councilor Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question for the elected officials here, I know last legislative session, there was a record number of bills put forth. Is that correct? And it's a lot to make to the finish line. Are you all hearing that that's could happen again, or is there a pulse on what to expect with that? Thanks.
Yeah, we had over 700 bills submitted, and we had record numbers in the last budget session. I tried to bring a budget amendment that in Rules Committee that would have limited the number of bills in the House. The Senate has the limited number, so we aren't going to break the record again in total. We might break the record for bills that are given in the House because I still don't think we have, or maybe it's 5. Anyway, this has just been the pattern of behavior you're seeing. Our LSO staff are feeling it. Keep in mind that the budget session is very different than the rest of the legislative sessions because you have to pass 2/3 introduction. Myself, I'm not going to bring an individual bill, because we have the recalibration bill, which funds public education in the state of Wyoming. And then we also have the budget that we are constitutionally mandated to pass. And there's a lot of people that are not very optimistic about the passage of the budget this year. So I think the work is cut out for us. I hope we don't see record number of bills. I hope we're only solving Wyoming problems, but I don't think that there's any evidence to suggest that every lawmaker feels the same way that I do.
Representative Sherwood. So when I requested the bill draft for the Housing Investment Fund that I'm going to bring again, it was draft request number 313, and that was 2 weeks ago.
That's early.
Yeah.
Early time.
So I will be focused on the budget recalibration, but I am bringing the housing investment bill again. And just for transparency's sake, initially that bill was envisioned as both a grant and loan program. I'm going to simplify it this go around and do it as a low interest revolving loan fund, but also expand how it can be used. So right now the outline is to purchase land, redevelopment costs, infrastructure, construction costs, so actually building the housing, and then rehab of existing, which goes back to the modular and electrical upgrades, so any kind of code thing. So you'll see that hopefully sometime in December get posted.
Senator Rumpus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just note that it wasn't a Senate problem. It was very much a House problem. And we did have a record low passage rate, I believe, of committee bills also last session. Certainly during the time that I've been in the legislature, it was far and away the lowest. The Senate did introduce and consider all of legislation that came to the Senate. The House, I think, killed almost 20%, something like that, of bills on general file. And these are the kinds of things that make a big difference. I've never seen that before, and a lot of good bills died that way. A lot of bad bills died that way too. So it's not like it was a total but there is still a lot of concern. I believe there have been a lot of conversations with House members about maybe not doing it that way again and trying to focus on passing legislation that needs to be passed instead of focusing on the politics. But, you know, I don't think we can make any promises. Certainly with the upcoming budget session, as Representative Provenza pointed out, you have to get the bill introduced, and that should probably thin it a little bit on the front end of House bills. Although I do think the Senate will, again, consider bills appropriately and work the bills that need to be worked.
Representative Bolton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The other component of the budget session, for those of you that have done this before, it will look slightly different and more friendly, I believe, to the public this year because we implemented rules around timelines for the budget. I can pull those up if you want them, but essentially now what happens is we go through committee of the whole, we don't finish all of it, and that's committee of the whole is the first reading of the budget bill and any bill, but we'll go through that on, I believe, on Wednesday and of the second week. And then we finish that committee of the whole reading on the second day, which is an important time frame because that's when we can submit budget amendments for second reading. That's important to you because you might want to work on a budget amendment with a lawmaker. And so if you're interested in like, hey, we didn't see this in the budget, or we've got the shortfall in our funding, that would be the time, like you want to pay attention to that time frame so that you can work with someone on a budget amendment because it has to be submitted by that time. And then what's different from the last budget process is also that you will be able to have time to look at those amendments. So instead of submitting those sometimes immediately before we start the second reading or the third reading, you have about 24 hours to read those budget amendments so that you know what the debate will be on the floor, or you can submit like, hey, I saw this budget amendment that's totally bonkers. Here's the reality of what it would do to our community, or here's how it would benefit. And then you have more time to get a hold of us. As always, at least for me, the best way to get a hold of me during the budget process is through a text message, because everything moves so fast. And the phone number on the website, which Todd will give you, is my personal cell phone number. So I think that's true for all of us here. So just pay attention to those timelines so that'll help you understand what's going on. And if you need them, please let me know.
Any further question or comment? I want to thank you all very much for coming tonight and engaging with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for making it fun.
Thanks for dinner.
Yes, thank you.
Dinner and a shower.
Councilor Newman.
We need to go to the public.
I was just about to do that. What would I do without you? I was gonna ask staff if you had any final comments.
I'd just like to share our gratitude for everybody participating tonight and enjoying the conversation. I think it's important and it will guide us as we move through our work in the future. So.
Thank you. I really learned a lot. And I appreciate you all taking the time to go through the process. It makes it a little more transparent. Is there any public comment on this work session? All right. Seeing none, we are adjourned for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.